I always believed in loyalty. I thought that if you truly loved someone, you'd stick by them no matter what. There are good women out there, loyal women who honor their vows, who share the same values I hold dear. And I was convinced Megan was one of them. She was my partner, my rock, the one I thought I'd grow old with. I never doubted her, not even once. To me, our love was unwavering, and I always thought it was enough to keep us together. I had dreams, simple ones really, of growing old with Megan, of us being that happy couple, sitting on a porch swing, sipping lemonade, laughing at old memories. I never thought I'd have to question her loyalty or face the kind of heartbreak that seemed like a nightmare scenario. Sure, sometimes I worried about things. My job wasn't bringing in a lot of money. I wasn't a success in the way some people define it. I knew Megan liked the finer things in life, but I thought we were happy despite that. I never let myself think that she could be unhappy enough to look elsewhere. There was a part of me that feared betrayal, but it always seemed like something distant, something that happened to other people, not to us. I remember a conversation I had with a friend who was going through a rough patch in his marriage. He mentioned how fragile relationships could be, and I just laughed, saying, Megan would never do that. I meant it too. I had no doubts in her. Megan was the one person I was sure would stand by me through anything. I guess in a way, I was living inside a bubble, a belief bubble that gave me comfort. I wanted so badly to believe that love was enough, that as long as we loved each other, nothing else mattered. I never saw the cracks that were starting to form, or maybe I just didn't want to see them. I ignored the signs, the little ways in which Megan seemed distant at times, the longing in her eyes when she spoke about others who had more than we did. I thought love was all we needed. But I was wrong. That belief bubble protected me for a long time, but it also kept me blind. I thought I had a perfect marriage, but I had no idea that everything I cherished could be shattered so easily. And when that bubble finally burst, it wasn't just my trust that broke. It was the entire foundation of what I thought my life was built on. I used to think Megan and I had it all. Sure, we weren't rich, but we had something I thought was much more important. A strong bond, a love that could weather any storm. We had a cozy little home, filled with things that held meaning for us. Photos from road trips, mementos from birthdays and anniversaries. It was a life built together, and for the longest time, I thought it was perfect. Our routines brought me comfort. We'd spend our Sunday mornings making breakfast together. Megan loved pancakes, and I loved watching her laugh as she tried to flip them in the pan. Evenings were our time, cooking dinner side by side, talking about our days. It wasn't glamorous, but it was us, and it was enough for me. I never needed anything more than what we had, a loving partner by my side, and a shared dream of growing old together. But there were small things, little moments that hinted at an underlying tension. Megan would talk about her friends, their lavish vacations, their new homes, the cars they drove, and there was a look in her eyes, a kind of longing that I tried to ignore. I wasn't oblivious. I could see it, but I convinced myself that she was happy with me, that our love made up for whatever material comforts we lacked. I believed that as long as we had each other, the rest didn't matter. I knew I wasn't the wealthiest guy. I worked hard, did my best to provide for us, but I knew there were things I couldn't give her, things she sometimes hinted at, though she never said them out loud. I tried to push those thoughts away, tried to remind myself that love was enough, that no matter what, Megan and I would always be okay. And for a while, that illusion worked. Our life seemed perfect on the surface, even if there were cracks beginning to show underneath. I ignored the signs because I wanted so desperately to believe in what we had, in the life we'd built. I wanted to believe that our love was unshakable, that we were different from those couples whose marriages fell apart. I thought we were untouchable. It all started with an unexpected visit from my neighbor, Mark. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening, one of those days where everything felt routine. I had just gotten home from work and was about to settle in when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there was Mark, standing there with an uneasy look on his face. I thought he might be dropping by to borrow something or to talk about some minor neighborhood issue. But there was something in his eyes that told me this was different. "Hey John, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice low. I invited him in, and he hesitated, like he was trying to figure out the right words. He looked down, avoiding eye contact, and I could feel my stomach starting to twist. There was a kind of tension hanging in the air, and I could sense that whatever he had to say wasn't going to be good. Mark took a deep breath and finally said, "I saw Megan the other day. She was with someone. It didn't look right, John." He paused, as if hoping I'd somehow know what he meant without him having to say more. But I didn't. My heart started pounding, and I felt my mouth go dry. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He went on to explain how he had seen Megan with another man at a restaurant downtown. He said they looked close, like more than friends. He described how they were laughing together, holding hands across the table. My mind went blank for a moment, and then I felt a wave of disbelief. This couldn't be true. Not Megan. I forced a smile, hoping Mark was mistaken. "Are you sure? Maybe it wasn't what you think," I said, but Mark shook his head. He looked at me with a kind of sadness, and I could tell that this wasn't easy for him. He didn't want to be the one telling me this, but he felt I had a right to know. "I'm really sorry, John. I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't think it was important." His words hung in the air like a heavy weight, pressing down on me. I tried to make sense of it, to find some way to explain it away, but I couldn't. The image of Megan with another man started to take hold in my mind, and it was like a knife twisting in my chest. After Mark left, I just sat there in silence. The room felt different, like it wasn't even mine anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about Megan, felt like it was slipping away. I wanted to believe Mark was wrong, that he had somehow misunderstood what he saw. But deep down, there was a feeling that I couldn't shake. A part of me knew that he wasn't lying, that this was real, and that my life was about to change in a way I wasn't ready for. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Megan right away, demand an explanation, but another part of me was terrified. What if it was true? What if everything I believed in was a lie? I felt lost, stuck between wanting to know the truth and being too scared to face it. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that taking the next step would change everything, but not knowing if I had the strength to do it. After Mark left, I found myself caught in a haze of disbelief. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. Megan was the love of my life, my partner, my everything. The idea of her being with someone else just didn't make sense. I kept telling myself that there had to be some mistake, that Mark was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation. I held on to that thought for as long as I could, because the alternative was just too painful to face. The next few days were some of the longest I can remember. I tried to go on as if nothing had changed. I went to work, I came home, I talked to Megan as if everything was normal. I watched her smile, watched her go about her day, and I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But deep down, That seed of doubt had already been planted, and it started to grow. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The late nights at work, the way she'd sometimes seem distant, the way she'd avoid eye contact when I asked about her day. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The doubt was eating away at me, and I knew I had to find out the truth, one way or another. One night, after Megan had gone to bed, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at her phone on the counter. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking as I picked it up. I felt guilty, like I was betraying her trust, even though I was the one who had been wronged. I typed in her passcode, one I had known for years, and opened her messages. At first, everything looked normal: chats with friends, family, the kind of everyday conversations we all have. But then I saw his name, David. I felt my stomach twist as I clicked on the conversation. What I saw confirmed everything I'd been trying so hard to deny. The messages weren't explicit, but the meaning was clear. Inside jokes, plans for dinners, late-night conversations. These were the kind of messages you send to someone you're close to, someone you care about, in a way that goes beyond friendship. There was a photo of the two of them smiling at some fancy restaurant. Megan looked happy, happier than I'd seen her in a long time. I could feel my chest tightening, the pain almost too much to bear. I put the phone down and just stood there, feeling like the world had shifted beneath my feet. Everything I had believed in, everything I had built my life around, was unraveling. I had always thought Megan would be by my side, that our love was unbreakable. But now I was faced with the truth, that it wasn't, not even close. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Megan, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept wondering where I had gone wrong, what I had done to push her away. I tried to tell myself that there was still some explanation, some way to make this all make sense. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew that there wasn't. The truth was right in front of me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't deny it anymore. The morning after I found those messages, I felt hollow. It was like someone had reached inside me and ripped out everything that made me feel like myself. Megan was the one person who I thought would always be in my corner, the person who would see my flaws and love me anyway. And now, all I could think about was how I had failed, how I wasn't enough. The questions were relentless, each one hitting me harder than the last. Why wasn't I good enough for her? What did David have that I didn't? I went through the motions of my day, but everything felt surreal. I'd catch a glimpse of myself in a mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. I looked tired, broken, like a man whose spirit had been shattered. I felt smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what Megan had done. It was like all my worst insecurities had come true. The doubts I'd had about myself, the fears that I wasn't successful enough, attractive enough, good enough, were now impossible to ignore. I couldn't help but compare myself to David, even though I barely knew anything about him. He was someone who could take Megan to places I could never afford, who could give her a life filled with luxury and comfort. And there I was, just an ordinary guy, doing my best, but never quite measuring up. I kept thinking that maybe if I'd been more ambitious, made more money, or been more exciting, Megan wouldn't have looked elsewhere. Maybe if I had been better, she wouldn't have left me behind. These thoughts haunted me, following me everywhere I went. Even at work, I couldn't escape them. I'd sit at my desk, staring at my computer, the words and numbers blurring together because all I could think about was how I had failed. The doubt was overwhelming, and I couldn't find a way out of it. It was like being stuck in a loop, replaying every mistake I'd ever made, Every moment where I could have done better but didn't. It was exhausting. At home, it was worse. Megan would walk through the door, smile at me, and I'd feel my heart break all over again. I'd wonder if she was thinking about him when she looked at me, if she was comparing us the way I was comparing myself to him. I started pulling away from her without even realizing it. I'd avoid eye contact, keep conversations short, anything to avoid facing the reality of what she had done. I felt like I was losing myself, like the person I used to be was slipping away, replaced by someone who was scared, insecure, and filled with doubt. For the first time in my life, I truly felt worthless. Everything I had believed about myself, everything that made me feel like I mattered, had been called into question. I wasn't sure how to move forward, or if I even could. The hurt was too deep, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to climb out of it. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. The weight of what I knew, the messages, the betrayal, it was tearing me apart. I had to confront Megan. I needed answers, even if I wasn't ready for the ones she might give. One evening after dinner, I finally decided it was time. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, and I stood there, just watching her for a moment. My heart was pounding, and my hands were trembling. Everything I was about to say could change our lives forever, but I couldn't keep living in limbo. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Megan, we need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, her face showing a mix of confusion and concern. "What is it, John?" she asked. I tried to steady myself, to find the right words, but there was no easy way to do it. "I know about David," I finally said, my voice breaking. The room fell silent, and I could see the color drain from her face. She looked down, her expression shifting to one of guilt, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me: anger, sadness, disbelief. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling. She hesitated, her eyes still fixed on the floor. "A few months," she whispered, and those words cut through me like a knife. A few months. She had been lying to me, living this double life, while I was here, clueless, believing in a love that wasn't even real anymore. I could feel the tears welling up, but I fought them back. I didn't want to break down in front of her. Not now. "Why, Megan?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this?" She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, John," she said, her voice shaky. "I've just felt disconnected, like something was missing. David, he made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time." Her words stung, each one like a blow to my heart. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make her understand the pain she had caused me, but all I could do was stand there, feeling my world crumble around me. She tried to explain, to tell me how she had felt lost, how she didn't mean for it to happen, but her words felt empty. There was no excuse that could make this okay. I had given her everything I had, and it still wasn't enough. The more she talked, the more I felt myself shutting down, my heart hardening against her words. I realized then that no explanation would ever make this right. Nothing she could say would erase the betrayal, the lies, the hurt. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned away from her, walking out of the living room, leaving her there with her apologies and excuses. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and finally let the tears fall. I felt broken, like everything I had believed in had been shattered beyond repair. The confrontation had given me the truth, but it hadn't given me any peace. Instead, it left me feeling emptier than I had ever felt before. After confronting Megan, I felt like I was living in a fog. It was as if the world had lost its color, everything muted and gray. I'd go through the motions of my day, wake up, go to work, come back home, but I wasn't really there. My mind was stuck in that moment, replaying the confrontation over and over again. The look in her eyes, the way her voice shook when she tried to explain. It all haunted me, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness next to me, where Megan used to be. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the thoughts would come rushing back. Images of her with David, the words she had said about feeling disconnected, about something missing. It made me question everything about myself, about our marriage. Was I that blind? Had I really missed all the signs that she was unhappy? I felt like a fool, and the pain was almost unbearable. I'd go to work, but my heart wasn't in it. I'd sit at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, unable to focus. My colleagues would ask if I was okay, and I'd force a smile, tell them I was just tired. But inside, I felt broken. The weight of the betrayal was always there, a constant ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. Even the simplest things felt overwhelming. I'd see a happy couple walking down the street, and it would hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a reminder of what I had lost, of the life I thought I had, but never really did. At home, the silence was suffocating. Megan and I still shared the same space, but it felt like we were worlds apart. She tried to reach out a few times, tried to talk, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't look at her without feeling the sting of betrayal. Every smile she gave me, every attempt at a normal conversation, felt like a reminder of the lies she had told. I found myself avoiding her, retreating into myself, building walls to protect what little was left of my heart. The emotional turmoil was relentless. One moment, I'd be angry at her for what she had done, for throwing away everything we had built. The next, I'd feel a wave of sadness so deep that it felt like I was drowning. I'd wonder if I would ever feel okay again, if the pain would ever fade, or if this was just my new reality. It was like being on a roller coaster that I couldn't get off, the highs and lows coming without warning, leaving me exhausted and empty. I was lost. Everything I had believed in, everything I had built my life around, had fallen apart, and I had no idea how to put the pieces back together. The heartbreak was all-consuming, and all I could do was take it one day at a time, hoping that somehow, eventually, it would start to hurt a little less. In the days that followed, I found myself standing at a crossroads. Should I stay and try to make things work with Megan, or should I leave and start over on my own? The thought of leaving terrified me. We had been together for so long, and despite everything she had done, a part of me still loved her. There was a comfort in the familiarity, in the life we had built, even if it had all been shattered. But another part of me knew that staying would mean living with the pain of betrayal every day, trying to rebuild something that might never be whole again. I spent countless sleepless nights weighing my options, going over every possible scenario in my mind. What if I stayed, and we somehow managed to fix things? Was it even possible to trust her again, to look at her without seeing the lies? And what about the love we once shared? Could that ever be the same, knowing what she had done? The questions were endless, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find any easy answers. One evening, I sat alone in our living room, staring at an old photo of Megan and me. It was from a trip we had taken years ago, before everything fell apart. We looked so happy, so carefree, and I realized that I didn't recognize those people anymore. We had changed, and what we once had was gone. I couldn't keep holding on to a memory, hoping that somehow We could go back to the way things were. I knew that staying would mean living in a constant state of hurt, always questioning, always doubting. I also thought about what it would mean to leave. The idea of walking away from everything I had known was terrifying, but there was also a sense of freedom in it. I imagined what it might be like to start over, to rebuild my life without the weight of betrayal holding me down. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be days when the loneliness would feel unbearable. But I also knew that staying would only keep me stuck in the past, in a place of pain that I couldn't escape. In the end, I realized that I had to leave, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I needed to give myself a chance to heal, to find out who I was without Megan, without the hurt. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that we could somehow fix what had been broken. It was time to let go, to take a step into the unknown, and to trust that I would find my way. After making the decision to leave Megan, I realized I couldn't do it alone. The thought of moving out, of starting over, was overwhelming, and I knew I needed help. So I reached out to my brother, Tom. He was always the level-headed one, the person I could count on when things got tough. I called him one night, and as soon as he picked up, I felt a lump in my throat. I didn't even know where to begin. But the moment I said, "I think I need to leave Megan," he understood. Tom listened as I told him everything about the affair, about how broken I felt, about the decision I had made to walk away. He didn't judge, didn't tell me what I should have done differently. He just listened, and when I finally stopped talking, he said, "John, you're doing the right thing. You deserve better." Hearing those words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had been questioning myself, wondering if I was to blame. But Tom reminded me that I wasn't alone, and that I still had people who cared about me. Tom came over that weekend to help me pack. It was strange, putting my life into boxes, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. There were moments when I felt like I couldn't go through with it, moments when the memories would hit me and I'd feel my resolve start to crumble. But Tom was there, steady and supportive, reminding me that this was the first step towards something better. He kept me grounded when I felt like I was falling apart. I also reached out to a few close friends, people I knew I could trust. I remember meeting up with my old friend Dave for a drink. He knew something was up the moment he saw me, and when I finally told him, he just shook his head. "John, I had no idea. I'm so sorry, man." He gave me a hug, and in that moment, I felt a little less alone. Dave and a few other friends rallied around me, inviting me over, making sure I wasn't alone in the evenings. They didn't try to fix things. They just made sure I knew they were there for me. I even went to stay with my parents for a few days. It felt strange, like I was taking a step backward, but it also brought a sense of comfort. My mum made my favorite meals, my dad sat with me in the evenings, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of peace. They didn't ask too many questions, didn't pry. They just let me be, and that was exactly what I needed. The support from my family and friends didn't take away the pain, but it made it bearable. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I still had people in my corner who wanted to see me happy. And slowly, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. It wasn't going to be easy, but with the people I loved by my side, I knew I could take it one day at a time. After I moved out, everything felt uncertain, like I was starting from scratch. It was terrifying, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of freedom in it. I had no idea what my future looked like, but I knew that I had a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. The first few days in my new apartment were hard. The silence was deafening, and the emptiness felt like a constant reminder of everything I had lost. But I knew that I couldn't stay in that place forever. I had to find a way to heal. I decided to focus on small, tangible goals, things that I could control. I started by getting back into the gym. It wasn't easy at first. I felt sluggish, weighed down by everything that had happened. But the more I went, the better I started to feel. There was something about the physical exertion, about pushing my body, that helped clear my mind. It was like each drop of sweat was washing away a piece of the pain. The gym became my escape, a place where I could feel strong again, even if it was just for an hour at a time. I also started cooking for myself. It was something I had never really done before. Megan always took the lead in the kitchen, and I was happy to let her. But now, it was just me. I remember the first meal I made. Simple pasta, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It was a small thing, but it felt like an accomplishment. I started experimenting with different recipes, and soon enough, cooking became something I looked forward to, a way to take care of myself when everything else felt out of control. One of the most important things I did was get involved in volunteering. It wasn't planned. I came across a flyer for a local shelter while I was out one day, and on a whim, I decided to sign up. I needed something to take my mind off of everything, something that would make me feel like I was contributing, like I had a purpose beyond my own pain. The first time I volunteered, I felt awkward and out of place, but by the end of the day, I realized it was exactly what I needed. Helping others gave me a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt in a long time. It reminded me that despite what had happened, I still had something to give. Slowly, I started to see a shift in myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to live again. I reconnected with hobbies I had forgotten about, like playing the guitar. I picked it up one night, dusted it off, and began to play. The music filled the empty apartment, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. I was doing things for myself again, things that brought me joy. It wasn't about Megan anymore. It was about me, about finding out who I was beyond the relationship that had defined my life for so long. I began to realize that even though Megan's betrayal had broken me, it had also given me the opportunity to rebuild myself. I was finding strength in the small things, in the little victories that came from taking care of myself, from pushing forward even when it felt impossible. The pain was still there. It didn't just disappear, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. It was becoming a part of my story, something that I was learning to live with, rather than something that defined me. I was healing, slowly but surely, and I knew that I was going to be okay. I didn't have all the answers, and I had no idea what my future held. But I was finally starting to believe that there was a future worth looking forward to. And that was enough. Once I started feeling more like myself again, I knew it was time to push beyond my comfort zone. For too long, my world had been small, first centered around Megan and our relationship, then shrunken further by the heartbreak and isolation that followed. I wanted to start expanding that world again, to see what else was out there for me, even if it was a bit scary. I remember the first step I took. There was a cooking class at the community center down the street, and I signed up on a whim. It seemed like a silly idea at first, standing in a kitchen with a bunch of strangers, trying not to burn everything. But it ended up being exactly what I needed. I walked in feeling awkward, but soon I found myself laughing as I fumbled with a recipe, sharing stories with people I'd never met before. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a group of people enjoying something together. It was freeing. From there, I began saying yes more often. When my friend Dave invited me on a weekend hiking trip, I hesitated, but then I remembered that I wanted to try new things. So I said yes, and I ended up having an amazing time. The fresh air, the physical challenge, the camaraderie. It was all so different from the routine I had been stuck in. It reminded me that the world was still full of experiences I hadn't had yet, that there were still things worth exploring. I even went to a local art exhibit one evening, something I never would have done before. It wasn't really my thing, but I wanted to see what it was like. As I walked through the gallery, looking at the paintings, I found myself appreciating the colors, the creativity. I struck up a conversation with someone there, and it felt good. Just talking, just being open to whatever the night brought. It was one of those moments where I realized that life was still full of surprises, that there were still connections to be made, even when I least expected them. These experiences weren't about escaping the pain. They were about rediscovering life. Each new thing I tried was a step toward opening my heart and my mind again. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when I still felt the old fears creeping in. Moments when I doubted myself. But every time I said yes to something new, I felt a little bit stronger, a little more alive. It was a reminder that despite everything I had been through, there was still so much to look forward to. One of the biggest changes came when I met Sarah. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was barely even looking at all. It happened when I was volunteering at the local shelter, something that had become a steady part of my week. One day, as we were organizing donations, she introduced herself, smiling as she reached out to help me sort through a particularly chaotic pile of clothes. There was something genuine about her, something that put me at ease right away. We worked side by side that afternoon, and we talked about everything and nothing. It was the first time in a long time that I found myself smiling without the weight of sadness hanging over me. After that, I started looking forward to seeing her at the shelter. We began working together regularly, and the more I got to know her, the more I realized how different this was from anything I'd experienced before. There were no games, no expectations, just an easy connection that felt natural. She had this warmth about her, this kindness that made me feel comfortable in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't long before we exchanged numbers, and soon we were meeting up outside of volunteering, grabbing coffee, going for walks. I found myself opening up to her in a way I never thought I'd be able to after Megan. But it wasn't easy. The scars from what Megan had done were still there, and they made it hard to trust. I remember one evening, Sarah and I were sitting in a small cafe, talking about our pasts, and she asked me what had happened with Megan. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I didn't want to scare her away, didn't want her to think I was broken beyond repair. But there was something in the way she looked at me, patient, understanding, that made me feel like I could be honest. So I told her. I told her about the affair, about the heartbreak, about the doubts and fears that still lingered. I expected her to pull back, to get uncomfortable, but she didn't. She just listened, her eyes filled with empathy, and when I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so sorry you went through that, John," she said softly, "but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Those words meant more to me than she could ever know. They were simple, but they broke through the walls I had built around myself. Slowly, I started to let myself trust again. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the old fears would creep back in, moments when I'd worry that history would repeat itself, that I'd end up hurt again. But Sarah was patient. She never pushed me, never made me feel like I had to rush into anything. She understood that I needed time, and she gave me that. As our relationship grew, I found myself falling for her. Not in a whirlwind, but in a steady, comforting way that felt real. With Sarah, I didn't have to pretend to be anything other than who I was. She loved me for me, flaws and all, and that was something I had never truly experienced before. The more time we spent together, the more I realized that what I had with her was something special, something worth fighting for, worth trusting in. Rebuilding trust was a slow process, but with Sarah, it felt possible. She showed me that love didn't have to be complicated or conditional, that it could be simple, honest, and full of joy. And as I opened my heart to her, I began to see a future that was different from the one I had imagined with Megan. It was a future filled with hope, with the possibility of true happiness. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living, and I was excited to see where this new chapter would take me. The more time I spent with Sarah, the more I realized what true love was meant to feel like. It wasn't about grand gestures or trying to prove myself. There were no expectations, no demands to be someone I wasn't. With Sarah, it was about the little things, the way she would laugh at my silly jokes, the way she'd reach for my hand whenever we walked somewhere, the way she genuinely cared about the small details of my day. It was the kind of love that didn't need constant reassurance, because it was steady and real. I remember one evening in particular. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just a quiet night at my place. We were sitting on the couch, sharing a blanket, watching some old movie that neither of us had really paid attention to. Sarah was resting her head on my shoulder, and I looked down at her, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. In that moment, I realized that this was happiness. Not the kind of happiness that comes from wealth or status, but the kind that comes from being with someone who loves you for who you are. With Megan, I had always felt like I had to prove myself, like I needed to do more, be more, to keep her happy. But with Sarah, I didn't feel that pressure. She loved me, simply and completely, and that gave me the freedom to be vulnerable, to let my guard down. I didn't have to pretend that I was okay all the time. On the days when I was still struggling, Sarah was there, patient and understanding. She didn't try to fix me. She just stayed by my side, reminding me that I wasn't alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found something real. The love I had with Sarah wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is, but it was honest, and it was ours. We built something together that went beyond anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't about material wealth or how we looked to the outside world. It was about the genuine connection we shared, the way we supported each other, and the joy we found in the everyday moments. I realized that losing Megan, as painful as it had been, had opened the door to something far greater. It had forced me to grow, to confront my fears, and ultimately to open myself up to a love that was deeper and more meaningful. Sarah showed me that true happiness doesn't come from trying to be what you think someone else wants. It comes from being yourself and finding someone who loves you for exactly that. With Sarah, I discovered a love that didn't need to be earned, a happiness that didn't depend on wealth or status. It was simply about being with someone who cared, who wanted to share their life with me as much as I wanted to share mine with them. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything I could have ever hoped for. Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe how far I've come. When Megan left me for someone else, it felt like the end of my world. I was shattered, my self-worth in pieces, and I couldn't see a way out of the darkness that had taken over my life. I remember the nights of questioning myself, the sleepless hours of replaying every moment, wondering where I went wrong. It felt like I'd never recover, that the life I knew was over for good. But standing here now, I can see that losing Megan was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. The pain I went through was real, and there were times when it felt all-consuming. But it also pushed me to grow, to rediscover who I was beyond the roles I had taken on in my relationship. It taught me that my worth isn't determined by someone else's choices, that I am enough just as I am. I found strength I didn't know I had, and I learned that even after the most devastating loss, there is still life on the other side. There is still hope. Meeting Sarah was one of those moments that reminded me how unpredictable and beautiful life can be. She came into my life at a time when I wasn't sure I could trust again, and yet she showed me what real love is. It's not about perfection or trying to fit someone else's expectations. It's about accepting each other, flaws and all, and choosing to be there, even when things aren't easy. With Sarah, I found a love that made me feel at peace, that made me feel like I was truly seen and accepted for who I am. The journey from heartbreak to happiness wasn't straightforward. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the old wounds still ached. But through it all, I kept moving forward, kept reaching out, kept opening myself up to the possibility that there could still be joy, still be love, waiting for me. And there was. Life isn't perfect, and it never will be, but I've found a happiness that feels true, a happiness that's built on honesty, respect, and love. Now I can look back at everything that happened, and instead of feeling bitter or broken, I feel grateful. Grateful for the people who supported me, for the strength I found within myself, and for Sarah, who showed me that there is still beauty in the world, even after the darkest of times. I've learned that love and happiness aren't things that just happen. They're things you build, one step at a time, with someone who wants to build them with you. Megan's betrayal was devastating, but it led me to a life that I wouldn't trade for anything. It taught me to let go of what wasn't meant for me, to take risks, and to open my heart again. And it brought me to a love that was deeper, more genuine, and more fulfilling than I ever thought possible. I'm no longer the person who's defined by what I lost. I'm defined by what I found and the life I'm building every day. And for that, I'm thankful.